One. It is a brand new Monday edition of Flyers Daily, and it is for the 24th of March, 2025, and brought to you by Ticketmaster. Make more memories live. A lot to discuss this week, and some kind of 30,000-foot view conversation as well with our guest every Monday. We do a Monday with Meltzer episode to drop the puck on the week, and we do that today. Read his work on NHL.com and also PhiladelphiaFlyers.com. It is Bill Meltzer. Bill, it's been a pretty miserable week of hockey, although I think for the most part, with the exception of yesterday's game, I thought they played good hockey. Yeah. Yesterday was a different story, though.
Yeah, for sure. And because of where the Flyers are, they're at a point where it's not about wins and losses anymore. You know, you're going to lose some games. You might pick off a couple of games. Really, I did not like how sloppy the game was. It was, kind of put it bluntly, it was like an all-star game without the all-star teams.
You know? All-star game with not the all-star talent.
Exactly. It was a game where a year ago at this time, the Flyers were in a playoff spot right about now, and they got through the so-called gauntlet of games against teams that were playoff teams, the top teams, and Flyers held their own. Won some, lost some, but they were in a really good position at that point. Then they had a series of games against bottom feeder teams, and which is unfortunately kind of where the Flyers find themselves right now.
Yeah.
But these are games against teams that the Flyers should be able to beat. And as long as you're going out to compete, which I can take losses, right? I can take losses where I feel like the team competes, like they put forth an effort and they just fall short because right now the roster is really thin, and there were some injuries, there are depletions from the trade deadline and even before the trade deadline. So you're gonna have games that you're gonna lose. You're gonna go out, play well, but come up short. The game against Dallas was a good example of that. The Flyers really probably played well enough to win, right? Then you have the game against a team like Tampa, and the Flyers went out and they competed hard. And
Washington, they didn't give up in that game.
Washington was another one where they went out and they competed and they played a lot of nights what would be well enough to win. And if you come up short in those games, I can live with it.
Yep.
I didn't like the way it really felt like a preseason kind of a game. I was joking.
It was exhibition all over it.
Yeah, and like just the level they were not plugged in, and being 0 for the month in March on the power play, and you and I are both sick to death of talking about the power play, but you can't go 0 for the month.
It was even more glaring, Bill, because the power play is what got Chicago the win, and they're a 49-point team coming in. I mean, they are a horrible team. They had 49 standings points coming in, and they were ranked, 7th or 8th in the power play, and they get 2 power play. Granted, one of them's a 5-on-3 when he's called Couturier.
2-minute 5-on-3 of that, but
and but Donato backdoor both times, and Torch said after that was the difference. Their power play could score. Ours, I mean, the fact that we're sitting here on the 24th of March and they're 0 for 31 on the month is again, it's alarming. I don't want to go back into it because I just had enough with this friggin' power play.
Yeah,
you called it an all-star game without the all-stars. I said to you in a text message, I call it the DSHL, the Dog Bleep Hockey League.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I knew it was coming. I said it in the pregame show.
That's
all over this game.
That was one of the biggest frustration points.
Yep.
If there's such a thing as a double trap game, it was Sunday. Because the Flyers just played some really good teams and they went out and they competed and put themselves in position to win. Again, it's almost like some weird mirror of last year, except that instead of now competing for a playoff spot, the Flyers are playing out their final now 10 games left. But you want to see them go out and not fall in a situation where where your structure completely falls apart.
Go out with some dignity.
Exactly. That's what bothered me.
Yeah.
If you go out in the game and you happen to lose even to Chicago, it is what it is at this point. I just really didn't like what I saw.
Well, there's been so much subtraction going back to even last year at the deadline with Walker, right? And you have all this subtraction again this year. And, you're not filling in these holes with parallel players, players of the same ilk or better. You're filling these roles with lesser talent. And then you couple that obviously with the injuries right now to Ristolainen and him being out. Garnet Hathaway, I think, is a really big injury for them.
Especially the PK. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he really plays a role. And so does Risto. I think he's been their most consistent defender start to finish this year. But again, he's hurt again. And there's a shroud of mystery around his injuries. I don't know if he's in the Finnish Secret Service or whatever, but his injuries, it seems like really fly under the radar. So what's going on? But you're missing these guys. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that for the people that want the Flyers to do this again next year, and try and get in the running for McKenna because they see that he's got stats equal at the same age to what Mario Lemieux did, right? I don't think that there's too much scar tissue now to add more to it for veteran players. You have to start turning the page, or you're going to end up in a situation. And I think this is where teams like Buffalo went wrong, and Detroit, it's where they're going wrong. They're taking too long, and you're building up too much scar tissue with those players, and they're just not moving forward. They get one career. Players get one career. I know as fans, we get them for a lifetime. They get one career, and there is a tipping point here.
No, there absolutely is, and you end up in a situation, you like Buffalo, or even if on the other side, we'll talk about two other long-term, what became long-term rebuilds. Where did Colorado go right? Go back to 2008, and they were going to build their franchise around Duchesne.
Yep.
Right, and he's been a good player.
Yep.
Right.
They begged out of there eventually because they were losing.
Correct. And so they restarted the rebuild. They took a step backwards and got really bad again. But they realized they had to continue the rebuild. Took a step back and then took step forwards. They hit big, obviously, with Makar.
Yeah.
That was really the turnaround point.
That hits weird though too, because they're into the rebuilding, getting better. Then all of a sudden, Patrick Waugh resigned.
Yeah.
Right in the beginning of the season, and they just went to the dumpster. And they end up with that pick, and Makar drops to them. Absolutely. And good on them for making that pick because he wasn't a guy. The Heiskanen's there, Elias Pettersson's still there. Obviously, Heischer and Nolan Patrick were already off the board with the Devils and Flyers, but it wasn't until they got Makar that they paid the dividend for McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen.
Absolutely, and that obviously that rebuild ultimately paid off with a reset along the way. Hopefully for the Flyers this year is a little bit of that reset. You take a step back, and then hopefully you hit on some moves, and then you get better from there. That certainly is at least what the hope is. You don't want to end up in a situation like Buffalo where it's a perpetual rebuild.
Yeah.
And they keep picking at the top, and they've got some players out of it. But as a team, they never get better.
Yeah, they're on the treadmill, the standings treadmill.
It's a treadmill, and Edmonton was on that treadmill for a long time, even after they got McDavid, and even after they got Draisaitl, and then finally they added some pieces around them, but they're still lacking a goaltender. They're still, and that's
Toronto, same thing, Bill.
Yeah,
they dip into free agency with Tavares, and and they're a really good team, but they're still flawed.
You got to put the final pieces together, and particularly for those who just think like you tear it down to the studs, and you get a franchise player or a couple all-stars in there. Do you remember that South Park episode of many years ago with the underpants gnomes, right?
Yeah.
Like phase 1 is collect underpants, phase 3 is profit, phase 2 is I don't know.
Right? That's where a lot of teams are, and I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But collect prospects. Phase 3 is contend, right?
Yeah.
Win a cup. What's phase 2? We don't know. We don't know how to build around it, right? We can't build a roster. I mean, the Flyers need to do that. Yes, they need to collect more talent, but they need a lot more than just that. They need pieces to fit together, and this cannot be just a never-ending process. So I think this offseason, and really the offseason beyond that, is crucial because I've had enough of a treadmill. I think you really need something definitive moving forward here. Particularly because you have a year just right now where the Flyers traded 3 guys who are former first-round picks. 2 of them still at least somewhat recent, at least within the last 7-8 years or so, or even sooner, like in Farabee's case. So if you invested so much in developing those guys, and you're trading them now, largely to clear up salary cap space. Let's be honest, right? You better use it right. You better hit.
Yeah. I said this on an episode before, dealing with what I'm dealing with. You get faced with your mortality. I've had enough. Like we don't have an endless runway here. I thought this was interesting. And that's what you just said too is going to lead us to goaltending in a second. Yeah. But I saw this tweet from John Butchergrass. He said, Washington has the best record in the NHL. They have one player they drafted in the top 15, and that was 21 years ago.
Yeah.
Obviously, Ovi. 21 years ago. It's crazy. And he's still an animal. And he said their top 2 centers are 28 and 26 years old and are on their 3rd or 4th teams respectively. Yeah. And you're looking at, obviously, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and who's the other one? I'm drawing a blank on his name. Is it McMichael or Strom? One of those guys.
Dylan Strom,
yeah. He said one of their goalies is undrafted. The other was waived by St. Louis. Yeah. Tom Wilson should be in the MVP mix. 30-goal scorer, 11 on the power play. Culture and toughness that is so hard to find. And I look at that Washington team and the way they're built and the way they've retooled with Chikrin this offseason, some of the pieces they put in there. And I look at that team and I go, man, they're really well balanced. They're good on every special team. They're good on every underlying metric. They're well coached with Stefan Carberry. Look out for that team in the playoffs. This season, you can't look at the 77 points last year. This year, they're a 100-point team already. First one to get there. Watch out for Washington in the playoffs as a 1 seed.
I agree with you.
I'm stunned by that. I was so wrong about it.
I think many of us, myself included, were wrong too.
Yeah,
because they barely qualified for the playoffs a year ago.
Yeah,
obviously had to beat the Flyers at the final day of the season to get
to
an
empty
net goal, no less, right?
Crazy.
In a 1-1 game, they scored an empty net goal because the Flyers had to win in regulation.
Yep.
But you look at this past off season. What did Washington on paper, right, really add? Nothing elite, right? But you look at that roster.
Chikrin is Niskanen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's Niskanen and Pitlick, and you're adding pieces. And it's all click for them. Can they sustain it? We'll see over time. But
I don't think it's sustainable over time, but it's sustainable for this playoff run. I think
for this year for sure. I wouldn't want to play them. And
they got kicked in the playoffs last year.
Yeah, exactly. And so in every game day on PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, I do the RAV4 things and then the post game 5. And when I did the 4 things for the game against Washington, there's always 4 things and then 1 X factor. I really tried to look at what has made Washington so darn good, right? I mean, you can look at things like their goal differential, which is outrageous.
Minus 37 last year or plus 73 right now this year. That's
exactly
100 and some goals is insane.
Exactly. And as long as they overhaul their systems, they didn't add massive talent, right? So, but what they actually have is a very deep roster, and everybody plays their role really, really well. And that's
slotted really, beautifully. We talk about slotting a lot.
Perfectly. Oh. They slot everybody perfectly, and that's really what it's amounted to. And you could break it down, whether it's 5-on-5 or their special teams or whatever. That's really it. They just have the right personnel for the right situations, and it clicks.
And they're all the situations that happen to come up in a hockey game. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And look, they missed Ovechkin for like 20 games too. I mean, he's got like 35 goals in 53 games, which is just a ridiculous number, by the way. When you extrapolate, he's on pace for another over 60 goal season if it per 82. It's just ridiculous how good he is, and still doing it and chasing obviously the record. You talked about prior to the Washington conversation about moving forward, and for this team to move forward, Bill, we've been learning things throughout this season. Despite losing players and all that. We learned that, Bobby Brink is a guy that maybe can definitely go to the next level. You need to see some more consistency out of Brink, Force, or Tippett in the results of their performances. But one thing we've learned, I think, is that they can't go into next year with the tandem of goaltenders that they have gone into this year with. Now, you needed to find out, and this was a year to find out. But if you're going to want to move the thing forward next year, you cannot be undone by goaltending. And I just don't see any scenario where you can go in with Ersson and Fedotov next year.
No,
just can't do it.
No, I agree completely. I'm fine with Ersson as part of a tandem. Mm-hmm. I'm still not sure. Some people might say they are sure. I'm not sure if he could be a 1A in a tandem or really a 1B or a backup who gets a little bit more than normal use, closer to
like 35 to 40 games. Yeah.
I think he can fall in there. 1A right now is a little bit of a leap of faith where if he could be the 45 to 50 game guy. He hasn't proven that yet.
Yeah.
But I'm comfortable enough with what I've seen from him that I think he can be a player who gets a significant number of games. We're a year into Fedotov now, who joined the team late in the season, and I admire how hard he's worked.
Yep.
Yeah, and he had stretches where he was out of the mix. He was the number 3,
yep.
And he wasn't playing. He was a healthy scratch on an ongoing basis.
And he had earned that. He had earned his way to number 3 too.
Yes, he had. He had. He was ineffective other than one game in Tampa Bay early in the season. He wasn't getting the job done. Kolosov didn't get the job done either, which opened a door for Fedotov, which he took advantage of enough to work his way back into the mix as the number 2 or whatever. But you still don't get the consistency, right?
Yeah. There's just always the bad goal.
There's always the bad goal, and it doesn't matter how many shots he faces either. Mm-hmm. To me, it wasn't so much that he gave up 2 goals on 3 shots in the game in Dallas, right? Obviously, that looks ugly on a score sheet.
Yeah.
But all right, you give up a breakaway goal, you give up a deflection. You're facing a low percentage of shots. Happens sometimes, right? Maybe not 2 goals on 3 shots, but 2 goals on 6 or whatever the case might be. But when one of them is an unscreened shot from the deep center slot, no screen, no deflection, no traffic, and you get beat on it, that cannot happen when you have a team that's trying to stay competitive. I mean, I credit the team for battling back and getting it to 2-2 against a really good team. Mind you, a Dallas team that played a particularly bad game by their standards.
Yeah.
But still, a very good team. You were in that, and you outplayed them in that first period and go off trailing 2-0. That will just sink a team most of the time. And that can't happen. It happens way too much. The Flyers absolutely have to address goaltending as one of the top priorities this year. Whether it's a guy on a short term, which I think is the way to go for
2-3 years to
2-3 years. And you're trying to develop your prospects and kind of see where you are a couple of years out. But it cannot be this tandem again. I agree with it.
Yeah, I think we're just. I mean, I think they're going to get a split down the middle the rest of the way here, to play it all the way out, play the hand fully through. But talking to Torts on Friday for Hockey and Hounds, that's the sense I got. I was surprised that they went to Fedotov on Sunday because to me I was obviously going to be Ersson's game with the back-to-back. And even though Ersson came in, I didn't think the workload was too heavy, but I think this is just. I thought that was telling that they're going to split these down the stretch. Because in a normal situation, I don't think that they would have gone to Fedotov and taken that game away because of 2 periods that Ersson got on Saturday. But yeah, I agree. It just can't be undone by that. There's only going to be a couple of ways to get a deal done for a goalie because the UFA market stinks for goalies, Bill.
It does.
It is a hot steaming pile of what. You're going to have to trade or I mean, there's one guy. Look at a guy like Jake Allen. That's about where, he can play 42 to 46, 48 games for you, and Ersson can play the other. And I think you're in a decent situation. It's an upgrade. But I don't think you're going to be able to do much better than that unless you're going to go out and try and really trade for, kind of like the Devils did with a Markstrom but that's long term and big money. You can go for a Gibson who's got 2 more years after this, but at 6.7,
Yeah.
and he's off injured, which will do you no good.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your options are. They're not great. Bjarnason, I finished the year apparently for Brandon really good.
Yeah.
Had a really good. He's going to be in Lehigh Valley next year. Who else is going to be there? Is it going to be Fedotov and Bjarnason? Is it going to be Kolosov and Bjarnason? Because they're not sending Bjarnason to the ECHL.
No. They
no
won't.
Chance.
He'll start in the American League.
Yep.
With Kolosov and Fedotov. I don't know. I don't know where they're going to be next year.
Kolosov wants to be in the NHL. You don't want to be in the East Coast League.
Yeah, right. That's that would definitely entail him going, you know what? Could we do a mutual termination of my contract?
Yeah, I'd rather play in Siberia.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Crazy. So we'll see where it goes. I think there's a lot of writing on the wall here. And again, they got to move this thing forward. And I talked a couple episodes about, expectations. Yeah, they're going to have some money this summer. I don't think the biggest elements, I don't think your 1C comes this summer via trade or free agency or anything like that. I think that there's upgraded pieces put in the lineup on the left side, maybe a D, or, do they look to trade a guy like Ristolainen in the offseason? I doubt it. I think there's still worries about his availability, which is obviously pretty justified, right? Yeah. So I don't know what all happens. I think the big summer is the one after, but they have to improve this summer. I think we all agree that they got to improve. No, we don't all agree, actually. There's a lot of people that want them to suck out loud for McKenna. And I'm not there. I can't do it. Well, they might get lucky in this lottery, though, Bill.
Maybe.
Percentages are going up.
We'll see. This is a year where if you can get into the top 5 or so, you have a pretty. Now, mind you, I don't know. There's nobody who's a slam dunk franchise player, and nobody who I think is going to come right in and make an immediate impact. So it's going to be you're developing a guy, but there are some guys with pretty high upside who I think are a couple, a year or two away from being in the NHL, maybe, and then a year or two beyond that for being impact guys. I don't think there certainly isn't a generational player, and I don't know that there's a guaranteed franchise player either. But picking near the top, there's some quality. The Flyers have so many picks in the first and top half of the second round. You have to hit on some of those. You're not going to hit every one of them.
It's got to be a Richards Carter draft.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
To me, it looks like one of those where you can get 2 really good players. You're not they could end up winning the lottery and getting the first overall pick. We'll see what happens, but these are really important picks, and then the development thereafter. But you're right. I mean, look, like Connor Bedard rather is in year 2. Bill, I thought he'd be further ahead by now, but by where he is. But because that team has very little support there. He's got some good leadership. Foligno's there, and Maroon, who's going to be retiring, and Bertuzzi. They got some pieces, but I mean, he's a 56-point player right now in year 2.
Yeah.
Connor McDavid in year 2, Bill. You know what he did in year 2? How about this? Year 2, 82 games. He had 100 points. His first 100-point season.
Yeah.
Year 1, he had 45 games played and 48 points. So you don't come in right away and just be an absolute, bomber.
Right.
But
right.
year 2,
with a pretty serious injury. Remember the play with Brandon Manning?
Yeah, where he goes into the boards. Yeah.
Of course, Chris was as skilled as Bedard is. There's a little bit of a speed difference with McDavid. Of course, you can see that McDavid in virtually any player you want to name, but
not naming Quinn Hughes though. Did you see Quinn Hughes went over 25 miles an hour?
Oh
my God, he was flying up the ice.
Yes, absolutely flying. Absolutely.
With the puck, I was like, "What? This looks like a video game fast forwarding."
Yeah. Where you set all the settings on 100.
Double speed.
Yeah, that's just wild. But no, I mean Bedard will be just fine, and also he had a positional switch. So I think he'll be fine. Yeah, you add a little bit around him, and I think he'll be, a very, very good player. I mean, the thing is that then unless he hits just absolute mega star level quickly, there's so much hype that he brought with him into the National Hockey League.
Yeah, generational.
Yeah, exactly. And he still might be that, right?
Yeah.
He still very well might be
I
that.
think he can. I believe that he can. I think it's also the frame is smaller.
Yeah.
McDavid was a much bigger frame player.
Right.
I think that helps when you initially go in. I'm not suggesting Jack Hughes is a generational player, but he comes in with a smaller frame, and it took him a little bit of time because this isn't boy strength in the NHL. This is man strength.
No,
Farm man.
100%. And we saw Hughes in the Four Nations too, and it was a struggle for him. You have to adapt to a certain way to play. I mean, if you look at this year's draft, like a guy like Hagens, and we'll talk as we get closer.
Yeah.
But when you have that kind of smaller center, it does take those guys longer. So in many cases, because there's just a lot that they have to adapt to. So that's part of the whole development end.
Yeah.
I mean, we could really do an entire podcast on how drafting and developing are equally important. There's one process and the other process begins after you draft the guy.
Yeah.
And you could get the early development right. I mean, if you go back to, I think it was 2019 when the Hockey News Future Watch issue had the Flyers number 1 in the league. And legitimately so. They might not have had superstars, but they had all these guys who really came along well in their junior year after and the year after that.
Yeah, draft plus 2, the guys really had a huge step.
Their draft plus 1, and their draft plus 1, then their draft plus. A lot of these guys are playing in World Juniors in really top end roles, and they were looking like you had a lot of future pros there. Then when they got to the pro level, most of them fell by the wayside. In some cases, it was injuries played into it.
Like Wade Allison and guys like that. Yep.
100%, right? Exactly. So you're always going to have that attrition where you have a group of prospects and guys look really good, draft plus 1, draft plus 2, first AHL year, whatever. If it stagnates and then often quite kind of slips backwards a little bit, look at Elliot Desnoyers, right? His first pro year with the Phantoms was really, really good 2 years ago, but he's gone backwards since then. Yeah. So that's the development piece of it, and he looked really good. He came along really well after you drafted him to you got him to the pro level. So step one is drafting and early development, and then once they turn pro, that progression has to continue to get them to the NHL, but to make them regular contributing NHL players too. And I think the Flyers have actually done pretty well on the front end drafting side. They sought to get better on the development side.
Yeah, a couple of guys, Forster and Brink, I think are examples of guys that are getting it right.
Kept progressing. Yeah.
Yep. Last thing, Bill, I want to ask you about Alex Bump, because boy, did he have a year. He transferred, and we really liked what we saw out of him in development camp and those things. And we didn't see him in training camp because he was a collegiate player. But you're really seeing he has really hit a gear. This is a 5th round pick.
Yeah. And
some guys, don't get that notoriety. He goes and plays now playing for Western Michigan. They beat Denver, and he gets the overtime winner, 2 goals in the game. He had a monster year. I saw, maybe it was Butchergrass that tweeted out, this guy's a collegiate hockey superstar.
Yeah.
What have you seen out of this kid, man? He's been just unbelievable, his development.
He's been tremendous. He really looks like an NHL player who'll contribute.
His body, too. He built his body up a lot.
And that's a big piece of it. And honestly, for a lot of players, that USHL year, before they start college, can really be beneficial. No case
the facilities.
You have the facilities to be able to do that and train the right way.
Yeah.
A lot of times, guys in junior don't have that.
Yeah.
And then you also drafting, if you're drafting them at 18 and they have that USHL year, then you have that 5-year window to sign them too.
Yeah.
I
run my.
So that can really be helpful. I said Bump reminds me in some ways, obviously not identical players, but Bump reminds me in some ways of Noah Cates, where it wasn't that Cates' numbers necessarily just blew everybody away, but he looked like a guy in collegiate hockey. This guy's going to play in the NHL, and he's going to be a pretty solid contributor, which is what he's been.
Yeah.
And I think Bump can be along those same lines too, as being a guy come up to your NHL team. You know what you'll get from him, game in and game out, and he's a guy who could be a useful and effective player. I think sooner than later, honestly.
Yeah. Luchanko's season ended, Bill. First of all, they can call him back up. He can play some more games here before reaching the 10. Does it make sense to bring him in to have him play for the Phantoms? And there's a tipping point there where you can't go back as well, because you play a certain amount of games pro, you just can't go back to junior.
Right. Which gives, you want to have the full 6 games on him next year. And then if it's clicking, just keep him. Just keep him around. And he'll be 19. I think that's kind of a better spot for him. Plus, yes, to be playing in the NHL, but a lot of these games are against other teams that will not be in the playoffs.
Yeah, where's the upside here? It's limited, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's the September baseball effect that we've talked about other times too, where if you're a non-contending team and there's no pressure on. Whereas with the Phantoms, you're looking at a team that'll be in the playoffs.
Yep.
In a high leverage, high pressure scenario. Phantoms want to get further than into a second round this year. They won the best of 3 last year in the first round.
Over Wilkes-Barre Scranton.
Then they lost to Hershey in the second round.
No shame in that.
And no disgrace of that. I mean, but
that's like the 33rd NHL team.
Exactly. They really were. They really were. That's I guess credit to Washington for that too. But
yeah.
But it's a situation here where maybe they could win 2 rounds this year. Yeah. And to me, if Luchanko could be a part of that, to me that'd be more impressive if he can do that than he could put up 5 points or whatever it is at the NHL level and just playing out the string kind of games.
Yeah, I'd like to tie his ELC, the year to the same year as Mishkov as well. Yeah, I just like to stagger these things. I know they don't like to stagger them. He'd like to get it going right away, but we shall see. So a lot of stuff in this episode for sure. We certainly have gone on long enough. We thank everybody for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button there, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you ring the bell. You'll get notified every time new content appears here on this screen, and all the people listening through your regular podcast apps, give us a follow there as well and subscribe. Read Bill's work at PhiladelphiaFlyers.com and NHL.com, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll preview Flyers Leafs, the first game against Scott Lawton coming up tomorrow. So join us then on a brand new Flyers Daily.